in the right-hand column next to the name of the property. For example, we can change the appearance of this form by setting its properties. Let's go ahead and change the title on our form from Form 1 to My Window. Notice that Form 1 has changed to My Window in the designer view. And let's set another property that we'll use later, called Transparency Key. By picking a certain color from this palette, we are assigning it to be transparent. You'll see a bit later on how this will work. Notice that there are 3 color palettes that we can choose from here. Let's go ahead and select a lime green color. On the left side of the designer, you'll see a tab that says Toolbox. When you hover the mouse over it, the whole window will pop out, and then pop back in when you move the mouse away. Let's go ahead and pin this window in place using this push pin icon in the upper right-hand corner. The toolbox contains a list of all types of different controls you can use in your project. You can think of controls as common building blocks that provide interactive functionality on a form, such as buttons, checkboxes, labels, etc. To place controls on your form, simply drag and drop them from the toolbox onto the form in your designer view. I'm going to go ahead and drag a couple controls on here. Notice these blue snap lines that appear. These help you place controls with consistent spacing and alignment, giving a pleasing look to the layout of your form. Notice that these controls in the toolbox are grouped into different categories based on what they do. You can expand or collapse these categories using the plus or minus signs. For example, there are different categories for controls dealing with menus and toolbars, data, and even printing. If you hover your mouse over a control, you can get a description of exactly what that control does. To remove controls from your form, you can right-click on them and select Delete. Or alternately, you can select a group of controls and press Delete on your keyboard. Now let's look at the dialog controls. The nice thing about these is that instead of having to build out commonly used forms, these dialog boxes allow you to use common screens that are built into the Windows operating system itself. Among these dialogs are the very common forms to open a file or save a file. And also this one that lets the user choose a color, the color dialog. Let's add this to our form. Because these dialog controls only become visible when required, the designer shows them at the bottom of the screen, off of the form. But we can treat them the same way as any other control. They're just not visible on the form itself. The controls we've placed get named according to their type as well as a number. We see these names in the property window when we click on the control. And we can also see a list of all the controls in our project, including our form, using this drop-down box at the top of the properties window. There's a great variety of property settings available to us in the property window, such as color, size, font, and so on. And notice the descriptive text that appears at the bottom of the properties window, describing what each property does. Let's change some of the properties for our label control. Let me change the text from Label 1 to Desktop Window. Let's also change the font color to red and the font size and style. Let's choose Calibri and size 14 in bold. All right. Each control has a different assortment of properties, depending on what it does. Using the toolbar at the top of the window, you can sort these properties alphabetically or in groups according to their category. Now let's tie our button and our color dialog controls together. To give the user a better idea of what the button will actually do, let's modify the text that appears on the button. Let's change this from button 1 to Pick a color. Each Windows form is defined both by its design, which we have seen so far, and also by its underlying code. To see the code for your form, just select View Code from the menu bar at the top. Or alternately, you can also right-click on the form in your Solution Explorer window and select View Code. Notice that the Code Editor window opens up in a new tab. We can also drag these tabs down to create a new tab group and see both views at once. This is especially nice if you have a big monitor and want to work on two sections of the application at once. Let's drag this back to our original tab grouping. Right now, the code for our Form 1 is empty because our form doesn't really do anything. Let's add some code to make the button show the color dialog when it's clicked. When a user acts on a control, for instance by clicking a button, it initiates an action on the control called an event. You can see a list of the events associated to a particular control by selecting the control and clicking on this lightning bolt button in the Properties pane. Wow, with so many different types of button events listed here, it's nice that the most common or default event for a control can easily be configured just by double-clicking on the control itself. This brings us back to the Code Editor view, and we are placed in the button click event. In the case of the button, we see that the default event is the click event. We also see that VisualCSharp Express has automatically built out an area of code that will run whenever the button is clicked. This is empty at the moment, but let's add a line of code that will display our color picker dialog control. We won't go into much detail about the C# programming language in this video, but you can learn more about it at the Beginner Developer Learning Center at msdn.com/beginner. Notice that as you type, little pop-up windows appear, listing the names of controls and their associated properties and options. This feature of VisualCSharp Express is called IntelliSense, and is a way to provide context-sensitive help and guidance while you code, meaning that depending on what you're writing at the time, just the right options that are valid are shown. This feature is very useful to discover the functionality found in objects and helps you find property names for a given control if you don't happen to remember them off the top of your head. Now let's set the background color of the form equal to the selected color of our color dialog control. Note that this is a special keyword in C# used to refer to the form itself. Putting comments in your code is always a great idea to let other people know what you had intended with a block of code. These comments are ignored by the computer when it runs your program and can be placed anywhere. To use comments in C#, just precede the line with 2 slashes, and notice that comments are marked in green in the code editor. There's also a very handy feature on the toolbar to allow you to quickly comment and uncomment selected lines in the code editor. Compiling or building your project is the process of converting all the code you've written into an executable file that can be run. This also has the effect of doing some checking to your code for mistakes. Let's build our project and see if there are any errors. Select Build Solution from the Build menu. We see that we have one error. When we double-click the error in the error list, we can see the selected area of code that is an error. We see that we actually do need some parentheses in our method. Now let's build our project again. This time we can see the build results in the lower left-hand corner of our screen. So far, so good. Now for the fun part. Let's see how our application performs by running it. We can use this green play button in the toolbar at the top, or we can select Debug, Start Debugging from the menu bar. And so here's our running program. Notice that while our program is running, you won't be able to edit in the VisualCSharp Express. Now for the moment of truth. What happens when we click the Pick a Color button? Sure enough, it does bring up the color dialog box, and we can change the color of our form. Now what happens if we change it to that lime green color? Look at that, our form does become transparent. To close our program, we can just click this red X in the upper right-hand corner of our form. Now let's save our project by selecting Save All from the File menu. By default, projects are stored in their own folder under Documents, Visual Studio 2008, Projects. Let's go ahead and click Save. Now let's look at this directory in Windows Explorer. We see a couple files and a folder in this directory. The desktop Windows solution file with a .sln extension contains all the references for your project. This is the file that you will double-click to open up your project again in VisualCSharp Express. This file with the .suo extension you can ignore for now. It just contains some user options that you have set for your solution. Let's look in the desktop window folder. This contains all the files related to your project. The bin folder is where Visual Studio puts together the actual executable files for us. Bin is short for binary. When we compiled or built our project, Visual Studio created this folder. Notice that there are two versions here, the release or final version and the debug version of our program. To run our program, we can just double-click the desktop window.exe file in one of these folders. You can share the programs you create with others by simply copying the files that are generated in this folder to another computer that also has the .NET framework installed. The OBJ folder contains some intermediate project files that you can ignore for now. The Properties folder contains files that pertain to your project's properties and settings. The desktop window.csproj and csproj user files are your project files, and we've already seen the Form1 files and the program.cs files previously in the Solution Explorer. As you write code, there will be occasions that you make small mistakes. In the world of software development, these are called bugs. Fortunately, VisualCSharp Express can automatically find some kinds of errors for you, as we saw previously. These bugs will appear underlined in either blue or red squiggly lines in the code editor, similar to misspellings in the Microsoft Word program. Let's look at this in our code. Say we accidentally used the wrong property name. For example, if we used myColor instead of color. Now, if we try to compile or build our project, notice that VisualCSharp Express gives us an error message and underlines this as a mistake. We can see the specific error message by moving our mouse over the underlined section. Let's go ahead and correct this. Great. Sometimes a program will compile and run fine, but not produce